Hi, everyone. Most of you know that we have a self-regulatory body in South Africa called the Advertising Standards Authority. And in order to fall under the regulations that govern advertising in South Africa, you had to be a member of the Advertising Standards Authority. And it was used very, very successfully by many competitors in trade to file competitor complaints against the rivals' products. We've had a number of issues that have arisen before the ASA recently. One of them related to the manufacture and distribution of certain weight loss products and other over-the-counter medication that made all sorts of promises about miracle reliefs for things like diabetes and weight loss, fat loss programs. Many of those adverts were challenged by competitors, and in both instances, there were two court cases that went before the High Court in Johannesburg during the course of last year, where the court ruled that the ASA effectively has no jurisdiction over non-members. Now, what has happened in the past is that the ASA has, by virtue of the fact that most of the media in South Africa are members and the Print Association are members of the ASA, whenever there's been a ruling that's been made against a company in South Africa, then the print media or the advertising media would just simply refuse to air those adverts. So that was, in essence, that was what gave effect to the ASA's ruling. However, with the Herbex case, the High Court has now said if you're not actively and joined the ASA, then the ASA has no jurisdiction over you whatsoever. So in effect, what that has meant is that many advertisers in South Africa who've never joined the ASA as members are now advertising freely without having to have any regard for the ASA code, which sets out how advertising has to comply with the regulations. Both of the matters that went to the High Court have been appealed by the Advertising Standards Authority, so we're waiting to see what's going to happen with those judgments. One of the other problems that we've had with the ASA recently is a funding problem. And of course, the ASA is funded by the fees that you have to pay when you file a complaint. Consumer complaints are free of charge, but competitor complaints are quite expensive. So, ergo, if nobody's filing complaints before the ASA, nobody's paying any fees, so basically they're broke. What we do have in South Africa is in 2008 we acquired new consumer protection law, simply called the Consumer Protection Act. It was the first time in South Africa that we had any law that basically just encoded whatever the common law said about what your rights would be as a consumer. And the Consumer Protection Act makes provision for ombud to be appointed in relation to a specific industry. We have a motor industry ombud in South Africa that deals with complaints relating to motor vehicles and anything else in the motor industry. And what has happened now is that the ASA has applied in terms of the provisions of the Consumer Protection Act to be declared as the advertising ombud for South Africa, since that seems to be the only way that they would be able to have any form of regulation. So what has happened is, in order for the Advertising Standards Authority to be considered as an ombud under the Consumer Protection Act, is they have to revise the Advertising Standards Authority Code. The problem with that, of course, is that people can't decide what should be in the code and what should no longer be in the code. So the first issue is who is now going to be covered by the code, because in the past you had to become a member of the ASA in order to fall under its regulation. Now it's not clear who will be members and who will be covered by the code. The big question, of course, is where's the funding going to come from, because the government doesn't have the money to fund the code. So nobody's sure how the code is going to be, how the system, the ombud, is going to be funded. There's also a certain overlap between the jurisdiction of the code and other services ombuds that might deal with complaints that could ordinarily be dealt with by another ombud under the code. And then firstly, what happens with competitor complaints? The final issue is that of enforcement, because nobody's sure how the rulings from the ombud will be enforced. So in essence, the ASA may no longer be the appropriate forum if there's an advertising issue. We do have other regulatory bodies that will be able to deal with complaints relating specifically to pharmaceuticals and then food products also. So those are the developments in a nutshell. Thank you.